Good evening. We are live on Channel 17, Town Meeting TV in Burlington, Vermont. I am Christopher Viersma, the channel coordinator here at Channel 17. Tonight, I have the candidates for Lieutenant Governor. This is the 2016 Democratic primary, and we are going to open up with some introductions, some opening statements. So we will start with David.
Sure. Hi, I'm David Zuckerman. I'm running in the Democratic primary, which is August 9th for Lieutenant Governor. I'd love to earn your vote. I've been serving for about 18 of the last 20 years in the House and then in the Senate for the last 4 years here from Chittenden County. And it's been a real pleasure and honor to serve constituents throughout Burlington and then the whole county here. You know, I've been involved in politics ever since I volunteered for Bernie in 1992, and I think we're all very proud here in Vermont of the incredible work he's done across the country, really bringing bold progressive ideas to the forefront, challenging establishment politics, and saying we really need fundamental economic justice and economic changes in our country, protecting workers, making sure people get a fair wage. And that's really a lot of the model that I've run my political activity under, is getting more people engaged in the process, whether it was through marriage equality, introducing that bill, and then also fighting for it and working with marriage equality organizers across the state to build people power into the process, or GMO labeling, which so many Vermonters are so proud of over the last couple of months with that law going into effect, and then of course so disappointed because of the corporate power in Washington spending $100 million to defeat people's right to know what's in their food. And obviously Bernie did a tremendous effort trying to fight, as did Leahy and Welsh, against that. But my model has always been in the image of what Bernie's been fighting for, bringing more people in the process for environmental justice, economic justice, affordable housing, universal health care, and so many social justice issues. And the way to make that happen is by bringing more people into the process. So when you look at those issues, marriage equality, end-of-life choices, raising the minimum wage, GMO labeling, cannabis reform, the way these things happen is not because the political class wants them to happen, but actually because more people engage in the process. And what I would bring to the Lieutenant Governor's office is that 18 years of experience engaging people all over the state, while also now having time as Lieutenant Governor to travel the state and bring more people into the process, or to be at the State House bringing people in, helping folks find their voice and bring their voice to the State House to influence those in the building more than the corporate lobbyists and other lobbyists and special interests in the building who tend to have the ear of establishment politicians. So I would be greatly honored to be your voice as Lieutenant Governor. And also, I just want to express that as Lieutenant Governor, of course, the job is to moderate the Senate and run the meeting in a fair and impartial manner. And as Chair of Agriculture, when I was in the House for 4 years, I ran a very fair committee. I've ended up with the endorsement of Clark Hinsdale, former president of the Farm Bureau, as well as Enid Wanacott from the Northeast Organic Farming Association. And I think that shows that my work, while I'm a strong advocate on issues, has always also been fair to bring everybody into the process and make sure all voices are heard. And I think a lot of people in Vermont sometimes feel like not all voices are heard and that the process in Montpelier doesn't bring as many people into the system. So I really welcome the opportunity to talk about these issues as we move forward and look forward to your vote on August 9th. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Kesha, thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you, and greetings, Channel 17 viewers. It's always wonderful to be in Channel 17 studios. I worked in the same building as the legal director for our domestic violence program in Chittenden County, Women Helping Battered Women, now Steps to End Domestic Violence, and worked across the street before that as a preschool teacher at the McClure Multi-Generational Center. So I'm very rooted in my community, and I have spent those years fighting in the community for women, for children, for our public safety, and brought that same ethic and hard work to the legislature in Montpelier. Spent 8 years in the legislature representing Burlington, and in addition to my work as a preschool teacher and social worker, have also worked in local government, which gave me a tremendous lens into what our communities are facing, be it the opiate addiction crisis or access to the capital they need to rebuild their downtowns. So I've been fighting in Montpelier for families, for children, on issues like gun safety, universal background checks, making sure that we tackle our opiate addiction crisis. First-time homebuyer tax incentives, so Vermonters can get access to their first home and anchor our neighborhoods. And a whole host of other issues that I know matter to Vermonters. My background teaching preschool has made me recognize that access to early childhood education is an 8-to-1 return on investment. We need to focus on our kids and our families. That's why I'm running for Lieutenant Governor, to be a connector in chief and help ensure that our families come first. Thank you.
Thank you, Kesha. Shap, thanks for coming tonight.
It's great to be here. My name's Shap Smith, and I'm running for Lieutenant Governor. It's a wonderful thing to be actually running for statewide office in the state that you grew up in. I grew up in Lamoille County. Even before David was an organic farmer, I was out there on a farm in Wolcott, Vermont, growing produce and selling that produce at the local farmers market when I was a young kid so that I could buy actually ice cream cones and comic books. I grew up on a farm out in Lamoille County. I went to college at the University of Vermont, ended up living and working in Winooski at the Waterworks restaurant after college. And then after going to law school and spending some time in New York City, I moved back to Burlington in 1993 and started work at a law firm in Burlington and lived here for a number of years until my wife and I moved out to Lamoille County. You know, what drives me is my kids and other people's kids. You know, when I go into a school or when I go into my kids' classrooms and I see kids there that are really struggling, whose parents and families are really struggling, that makes me want to go to Montpelier and do things that are going to make their lives better. If it's expanding access to early childhood education, whether it's making sure that those families have the ability to find affordable housing, whether it's about making sure that the families that are suffering from substance abuse actually have access to substance abuse treatment. That's really what it's all about for me, because what I want to make sure is that the next generation has the same opportunities that I did when I was growing up and that many other Vermonters had when they were growing up here. Really, at the end of the day, we are judged by how we treat our children and how we treat the families of those children. And I believe through making sure that we have a higher minimum wage, paid sick leave, making sure that we have increased reimbursement for child care, not enough, but increased it, that we are doing things that will make families stronger. And I remain committed to that as your next Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Shap. Thank you for being here this evening. So we're going to open up with a question over the phone from one of our viewers. Hello, you're on the air with Channel 17. Do you have a question for the candidates?
Yeah, I actually had a specific question for Kesha.
Okay, go ahead.
I was curious why she still continues to campaign with Clem Bissonette every year, even though he still repeatedly votes to repeal rights for women. And if she could explain that to another woman here in Vermont.
Okay, did you hear
So the question was about Representative Clem Bissonette in Winooski and why I have campaigned with him in the past when he had a tough race. You know, Clem Bissonette is somebody who I respect a lot in the legislature, and when we think about the bike path in Burlington and downtown development in Burlington, we need folks outside of Burlington to help us fight for those things, because, you know, as I know, having represented our community for many years, it takes other voices to help us with the work we need to do. Burlington's not always the most popular place to the rest of the state. And so having a Winooski rep who knows downtown development, helping us to fight for tax increment financing, for the kind of revitalization that we need, has always meant a lot to me. He's always been there for Burlington as a Winooski rep. And when you look at Winooski now, how vital it is, how much new housing is online, how great their downtown is, vibrancy and vitality, that is a lot thanks to Clem, both as mayor and in his work as a legislator. So, you know, I'm still proud to stand by Clem Bissonette as somebody who's really supported our communities in their growth, helped put people back to work, made sure there's affordable housing.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe if the other candidates could comment on some of the situation of running their campaign and some of the folks that they have chosen, and maybe also respond to the caller in their own way.
I'm more than willing to speak to that. Look, when you're in the legislature, you have to figure out a way to work with people who may not agree with you on every issue, but who are working for a lot of the same goals. And within the Democratic caucus, and it's true within the Republican caucus, and I think it's true within the Progressive caucus, there are people who do not align on every single issue. And I liken it to working with somebody, working with a baseball team. Different people are going to be good at different talents, and they're going to bring different strengths to different issues. And you're not going to kick them off the baseball team because they may not be with you on one particular issue or another. If they're, Clem is somebody who has been there for workers' rights. He cares about working class people throughout the state of Vermont. And he and I, and probably Kesha and I, disagree with him on some issues around choice and other issues. But he has been with us in trying to make investments in transportation, in make investments in downtowns throughout the state, and making sure that working families have the kind of wages and protections they need. And so I've been proud to stand with Clem on making sure that he can bring those working class issues to the legislature.
Well, if I could add, with respect to who one endorses and works with in the electoral process versus being able to work with people in the State House, I think are sort of two different things. To me, a woman's right to choose is very important. And moving forward with progressive values is something that when I'm looking at a candidate who's either running in another district that I could potentially endorse or they could endorse me, I look at the candidates who are ready to move that envelope forward on many of these important issues: housing, economic development, livable wages, raising the minimum wage, but also social justice issues like protecting a woman's right to choose. So in the process of endorsing a candidate, I'm going to stick with folks that tend to be more progressive on those issues and really stand up for them. But then once you're elected, that's when you have to serve and work with everybody. And as chair of the House Agriculture Committee, vice chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee, a member on the Education Committee in the Senate, you learn to work with everyone. In the Senate in particular, and I'm the only candidate here who has served in the Senate, it really, the partisanship and the party breakdown kind of goes away, because with 30 members, you all rely on each other. And I think that certainly does happen in the House as well to some extent, but it's not a top-down structure in the Senate as much as it is in the House. And we rely on each other, whether someone's pro-choice or not pro-choice, supportive of more environmental protection or not. But you tend to work with people with the issues that you find common ground. And having experience in the Senate with that uniquely, I think I'm well positioned to work with all the different senators as the leader, as lieutenant governor.
So I'm Ann Galloway from VT Digger, and I'm glad to join you all tonight. Sorry I missed the first question. So I'm going to tackle the budget question first, if that's all right with you guys. Vermont faces persistent state budget shortfalls. What is the picture for FY 2018? What will your recommendations be to balance the budget next year? And let's start with Kesha.
Well, first I'd just like to say Ann is one of the hardest working women in journalism. I heard her this morning on Mike Smith's show talking about the EB5 program right before I was on, and so I know you've been working all day. We're glad to have you with us and finally able to make it. So let's start with the FY17 budget. That's the budget we're about to enter into fully. And, what we know is that our revenue has been downgraded, but we've been able to backfill that and deal with that rescission without cuts to our services and programs, because we had more money in the Medicaid budget than we thought than we anticipated needing. And so, we have to be able to plan ahead, but as our state economist for the legislature would say, sometimes getting to the right budget level and not disappointing Vermonters constantly is about having the right estimates and making sure your data is correct. And I've long believed that we often don't invest enough in having good data at the state level. That we have a diminished Department of Innovation and Information, and really bolstering that, especially if you think about the city of Burlington investing in a chief innovation officer, you can get the right data that gives you the ability to plan ahead and meet those estimates. The second thing I would say is that our tax system is still increasingly volatile. Many economists have told us for years that we have a small base and we have the kind of tax system that has a lot of loopholes that makes our revenue forecasts constantly causing us to have to downgrade year after year. And so for me, it's a combination of tax reform that will broaden the base and lower the rate, so we're not constantly nickel and diming Vermonters every time we have a budget shortfall, and making sure our data is correct and we're going out there with the right numbers to balance our budget.
Thank you. Shap, you want to go next?
So I think that this is going to be a persistent challenge for Vermont, and it's actually a persistent challenge for many of the states around us. The downgrade that we just faced in our revenue structure is going to be echoed in downgrades likely in Massachusetts and many of the other New England states. And it's the challenge that we have with basing so much of our budget on and our revenues on income tax revenue, which I think is the right thing to do. But there is huge volatility, particularly at the high end when the market shifts, and that is a huge challenge for us. In 2010, seeing that this concern around revenue was real, I pushed for the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission. One of the challenges has been getting other people interested in the results of the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission. And I, as Lieutenant Governor, would like to return to see whether we could make some progress on the issue of tax fairness throughout the structure. That's, I think, as Kesha put it, making sure that we broaden the base and lower the rates. It will be a challenge. Incumbent interests, frankly, don't mind the way that the system is now, and I think we have to work on it. The one thing that's been underreported with regard to the 2017 budget and 2016 budget is that we are making some progress on our expenditures. Healthcare expenses in the Medicaid budget were down significantly and are projected to be down significantly in 2017. Part of that is managing spending in a more effective way, and I think we are starting to see payoffs from things like the Blueprint for Health and other payment reform measures. So it's not only on the revenue side, it also has to be about making sure that we're spending our money wisely and we're giving the best value to Vermonters.
Well, thank you, and welcome Ann as well. I know you're at traffic challenges, so it's good to see you here.
I'm not used to Burlington traffic.
You know, the budget situation is one that I think we can reflect on our taxes and our revenues, and we can talk about what we want to do. But I have to say, Speaker Smith was in charge for the last 8 years, appointing the tax committee. Kesha was on it some of those years, and we continued to put out miscellaneous tax bills that nickel and dime Vermonters left and right, and folks are really feeling the pinch here in the state and not really looking at how do we adjust our tax system so that those who can afford to pay more are paying more. And I've been frustrated by that for many years. And when I was on the Ways and Means Committee, also fought for those kinds of changes. And even just a few weeks ago, Speaker Smith suggested potentially getting rid of the estate tax, which admittedly is very volatile, but it's still a revenue stream for the state. And when it's only taxing those who have estates over $2.75 million, I don't think those are the folks that need tax breaks as much as everyday Vermonters. And so when we're looking at a shortfall in the budget and then we start talking about giving wealthier people tax breaks, that's not the direction that I would go. You know, we need to look at efficiencies in government. I think Speaker Smith did talk appropriately about those savings that also were created, some under his leadership. I'll give him credit for that as well. But I've been working in the Education Committee, for instance, to look at how we can merge more of our human services personnel into our schools so we have more local opportunities for people to get those services, have those wraparound services that not only help them get through the day-to-day struggles they have, but also work with those folks to empower them into the job market and into the job world so that it isn't a constant cost to our state. And in that way, we can also save money because if the human services bubble is over here and the education bubble is over here and we're duplicating services, when we come together and work together, we can actually start to work towards reducing some of our costs and having more efficient programs and services. As a small business owner, you know, when this year, for instance, my farm had 50 fewer CSA shares, I didn't just say, well, I'll raise the price enough to raise all that money. I had to figure out where I was going to pinch my expenses this year, what crops we might have to figure out how to sell a different way, and you've got to make adjustments. And to me, the adjustments that we shouldn't be making are reducing taxes on the wealthiest and also proposing potentially increases in the sales tax that was also suggested by one of my opponents.
Thank you, David. Next question has to do with the economy.
Can we speak to that?
Sure, 1 minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's fair to actually sort of, this is a forum, so I think, yeah. You know, I think that David points out rightly that there are discussions around the tax code. And I was asked on Vermont Public Radio about the estate tax. And what I said is, philosophically, I am opposed to getting rid of the estate tax. But when you look at the numbers and the volatility of the revenue, you have to ask yourself whether we're serving ourselves well by continuing to rely on a source of revenue that appears to be continuing to go down. And so part of what you have to do when you're looking at issues around budgets and around tax revenue is do some assessment of what the real world looks like and try to compare it against your philosophical. In 2009, when we overrode the veto of Governor Douglas, one of the key reasons that I was unwilling to compromise with him is that he wanted to increase the amount of the estate tax exemption. So philosophically, and acting in the legislature, I think my record is pretty clear. With regard to funding for the water, I just have some concerns about the proposal that you made and that you supported about continuing to put more pressure on property taxes and with the per parcel fee for funding of the for clean water. And I just don't think that a lot of people are asking for more assessments on their property, and I don't think that that's the way that we should go. So I think that, you know, there are other options, and you know, I'm not actually advocating a sales tax, but I certainly am not advocating for an increase in what is essentially more of a property tax through a per parcel fee.
Thank you, Shap. So, Kesha, you want to do 1 minute?
Sure. You know, I think what this discussion and debate is highlighting is that we all need to come together and work together, because our tax system, you can't pull one thread without unraveling the whole sweater. And that's what our Blue Ribbon Tax Commission said to us, is that all of these are interrelated. Vermonters pay them out of one pocket or the other. And we really have to be focused on coming together and not being divided on these issues, because we're going to have some tripartisan and nonpartisan solutions to fix our budget and get this done.
Great, thank you. So, on the economy, is it true that Vermont's policies do not support economic development? This time we're going to start with David.
Sure. I don't agree with that assessment, in that running and starting a small business in Vermont, building it over the last 15 years from 2 acres with 1 part-time employee to now 3 year-round employees with 10 seasonal employees. I've been able to do that in the regulatory environment, the anti-business environment that our naysayer Jim Douglas used to talk about all the time. The reality is we have some of the best education system in the country, public education for everybody. We have one of the best quality of life scenarios. I think there are certainly things we need to do to improve more affordable housing for folks and more job training for folks, so that our employers who are actually looking for employees all across the state right now can find people who are ready and willing to step in and do the work that's available here in Vermont. You know, those qualities are things people are looking for all across the state and across the country. And people actually are interested in living in a place that's safe for their children, has a good school system for their children, where their children can go out back or walk to the neighbor's house and they can feel comfortable about it. And you know, we're living in a day and age with Trump's incredible false narrative around safety in this country. We have these tremendous tragedies, and there's no doubt we're in a very tenuous and sort of tinderbox situation. But frankly, the statistics are our country is safer than it's been for the last 20 years. And people are looking for that safety, in part because of Fox News rigmarole. But people want to come to Vermont. They want to find a job here. They want safety and security for their family. And I think we present that. And I think Vermont's got a very good reputation for quality of life, safety for children. And if you work hard, you're going to make ends meet, and you're going to have a safe community to live in.
Thank you. Shap, can you go next, please?
So what struck me going around the state is how much innovation and entrepreneurism is going on. I mean, if you go down to somewhere like Bennington and go to a company like Global Z, or if you go somewhere like Brattleboro and find a company like Against the Grain, that the founders started it because they didn't like the taste of gluten-free pizza. They worked through a recipe, and all of a sudden, 10 years later, they have 85 employees and serving gluten-free pizza throughout the country. You know, you see these stories over and over and over again throughout Vermont. And I think it is because, one, we have a history of entrepreneurism in this country, and startup businesses like a Ben & Jerry's or something like a Concept 2 in Morrisville. Great schools, wonderful quality of life, and a sense of community that I think that people long for. And, you know, I don't think that we're without challenges, but I think that they are overstated for political reasons.
Thank you, Kesha.
Well, when I talk to small businesses around the state, some of the things that come up are barriers that I think the lieutenant governor can uniquely address. There's some that has to do with our policies, but a lot of it can be the unevenness of the actors, or trying to do the right thing in a permit process and feeling like you're being shortchanged, or you don't know where to go, or they're really slow to get you what you need and you have a timeline to meet. So any number of things that businesses are facing are not necessarily taken care of through policy. And there's the lieutenant governor who's able to keep, you know, one foot in the legislature and keep one foot out in the community, working with the administration to reduce some of those barriers. And I'll just tell you a story about doing that work right here in Burlington. I, was a new legislator, and I had some constituents who had supported other candidates. They hadn't supported me, but they were opening their first cafe in downtown Burlington, and they ran into an issue with the health department. They had one bathroom, so it meant they could only have 25 seats. And they were subtracting their staff. They could only have 17 seats. And so, they came to me and said, we're just not going to be able to open on time. Can you help us? I said, I don't know any better but to try. So we got the health department in, we got them in to talk about what it would mean for their business, the fact that there was a bathroom right next door, and could they get a variance so that they could use both bathrooms in the case of a pandemic, flu, whatever the health department was worried about. And, they granted them that variance. They were able to open on time. It's August 1st Bakery and Cafe downtown, and now they own the space next door, and they bake fresh bread for our community regularly. Those are the kinds of things that you can't necessarily put policy to, you can't put a value on, but you can solve those barriers for one small business and then turn around and say, is there something we can do to make the process better for everyone?
Great, thank you. So it looks like we have a call, and I hope I do this right. Did I do it right?
No, we don't have a call anymore.
Oh, I think you hung up. That's okay.
I hit the
I'm
top
sure Dale
button and
knows the
speaker.
Call back, whoever that was.
That's okay. They'll call back.
Okay.
Yeah, you good as.
All right, sorry about that. Okay. Oh boy. So healthcare. Should we still work toward universal health care? What does the next legislature need to do in the next session to improve the health options for Vermonters? And this time we're going to start with Kesha.
Absolutely, we should continue working toward universal health care. You look at Cigna and Aetna, who are talking about merging as two insurance companies to get cost savings and administrative savings. And who are they going to pass that on to? Their shareholders. If you do that as a state and you say, let's find efficiency under one system to make sure that Vermonters are getting quality care, good outcomes, and we're not nickel and diming or overbilling or underpaying providers, then what you end up doing is passing those returns and those savings on to Vermonters. So I would support continuing to move in that direction. What we have to do is show Vermonters that they can trust us to do that, and that we have the right understanding of what it means to administer something that large. Right now we have a healthcare exchange that we've spent almost as much on as a state like California that has 30 million people and a working exchange. So we need to get that right, and that's going to take rolling up our sleeves and asking a lot more tough questions. Right now you look at the governor saying we can't possibly move to a different exchange model because we'll lose our premium assistance. Well, that's not necessarily true, and someone like the lieutenant governor or the legislature can be asking those questions of what do different models look like, and how can we continue to make healthcare more affordable for Vermonters while recognizing some of the systems we put in place are not working for a lot of families.
Great, thank you. David?
Well, I've been sponsoring universal health care bills since I first got into the legislature in 1996, and like Bernie's been fighting for them in Washington. The idea that people are getting returns on investments from the world of the healthcare system is just completely outside of what I would like to see us doing. I would like to see all of our dollars going towards providing health care, preventative care, primary treatment, primary care access, so we actually can reduce our costs in healthcare. Too many people, and I have an employee who said to me, I'm not well, but I'm not going in because, they don't treat me right because I'm on Medicaid. I said, you know what? You got to go in. You're going to get treated more quickly. You're going to nip the problem in the bud earlier. It's going to be better for your health, and it's going to cost everybody less money. And when we have this system that we have, which of course I think we all recognize, Vermont Health Connect has been a complete boondoggle. That has to do with administration. It's not actually to do with technology, because ultimately the technology worked, as Kesha said, in California, and we need management, which is ultimately the governor's job, to make sure that when we're implementing such big programs, they're done right. So it's completely understandable that right now there's some skepticism out there, but we can't let that skepticism get in the way of moving towards a universal healthcare system that's more efficient, provides more options in alternative medicine and alternative treatments for people other than invasive surgery, when physical therapy can do wonders for many people, where surgery has been the historic option for many. Where we look at, what are people eating, and we can be much more encouraging around incentivizing healthier diets through whether it's our welfare programs and how we incent people through the farm to family coupons or others that we can expand, so that with a universal healthcare system, we can reduce costs and improve outcomes and improve sort of the entry into the system that so many people feel as a barrier, because the health system can still be very barrier oriented for a lot of folks, and we need to break that down and move towards a universal healthcare system.
Thank you. Shap?
This issue is really personal to me. Over the last year, many of you know that my wife suffered through a battle with cancer, and she is doing really well now. But during the winter, we would get bills at the house. Like many Vermonters, we have a high deductible plan. And I would sit at the kitchen counter and try to figure out how much we owed. And it was incomprehensible. I have a law degree, my wife has a medical degree, and we couldn't figure out actually how much we owed. We ended up owing $7,000 out of pocket, which for many families in this state would be the difference between solvency and bankruptcy. And while my wife got great care, for many people, they wouldn't be able to actually afford to get that care, and that's wrong. I think that we need to continue to work towards universal health coverage. Now, it is true that people have lost confidence largely because of Vermont Health Connect, and I think we need to figure out a way to rebuild the confidence. That's one of the reasons that I've been so supportive of the expansion of Dr. Dinosaur, a program that is wildly successful and wildly popular in the state of Vermont. And I think we could rebuild confidence by expanding that program to people 26 and under, so that every Vermonter 26 and under would have health care coverage, and we could show Vermonters that we could provide it for the rest of the state.
Thank you, Shap. We're going to take a call from one of our, we're going to.
Hi.
Yeah.
My name is Ibnar Avalik Stratovus. I'm a social care worker. There's a lot of people who choose to leave this world. There's a lot of people who choose to overuse their prescription drugs or go to off the market drug use. And it seems to be rising, those numbers. And I'd like to see some more alternative ways for health care and alternative ways for people to enter society, but in a society that is different than the ones we are talking about now, about the stress of the economy and taxes and what it takes to pay rent. I think there's a lot of people who would love to live frugally on some vacant fields on farms. We want to grow the population, it sounds like. I hear that a lot, and I'm worried about the build, baby, build mentality. I think it's not going to serve or solve the problems that are growing with drug use and people that choose to take their lives. They want an alternative. So I hope we see some pilot projects that are creative and different than having to hold a 9-to-5, something different. People will live frugally and maybe live better.
So does anyone want to respond to that comment, or?
Well, certainly we've faced, and I really want to applaud Governor Shumlin for bringing up the opiate crisis, which is actually not just a crisis here in Vermont. It's clearly been a crisis in states throughout the country. And, we have to face our problems. And I think a lot of kudos goes to the governor for bringing that issue to the surface so that we can try to face it. On the other hand, we've woefully under-faced it. We still have a one-year waiting list, give or take, in Burlington. Throughout the state, there are folks who are waiting, and they come to get help. And we say, oh, we'd like to help you, but you have to wait 3 months or 6 months. Could you come back? And that opportunity, those folks who are down in that hole aren't necessarily going to resurface for help in the future. So I would like to see us put more investment into our drug treatment programs, but also into prevention and education, and ultimately do that through, oddly enough, funding and shifting our policy around cannabis, and actually bring that whole world of cannabis above board, where it's less harmful than alcohol, frankly, in our society, and we could put the resources towards prevention, treatment, education, law enforcement, and then ultimately also have money for investment, whether it's rural broadband or weatherization or higher education, because the real problem around drugs actually, I think, stems from people not really having hope, people struggling to meet their bills, people struggling to give their children one gift at Christmas because they can't afford their electric bills. When people are unhappy, and when our TV world says, just take a pill or take drugs and you'll get better from any problem that you have, we have a real societal problem, and we need to address it through both the prescription drug marketing world, the prescription drug world where people get tons of opiates for painkillers that then they become hooked on, but also through hope, through adjusting our economic system so that people actually have more vibrancy in their lives going forward and don't turn to drugs to get away from their problems.
Well, I want to thank Ibnar for the question. It was brave. It took a lot of courage, and really appreciate it. And I would just start by saying I think there's 3 ways one could respond to this question, and probably more. And I sometimes think of the quote, "It's no measure of health to adjust to a profoundly sick society." That people are facing some intense struggles and often feel alone. And so if anybody at home is feeling that way, get the resources you need, reach out to somebody, let somebody know how you're feeling. And that's sometimes the most important thing we can do. And I've talked to a lot of teens about that. I was part of a roundtable on preventing teen suicide. And if folks don't know, we're next to a state like New York. They are 50th in teen suicide. We're actually 7th. And a lot of those are with guns or prescription drugs. And the access to prescription drugs and guns that we have in this state is really a twofold problem. And in some ways, it can be interrelated. There's a lot of drug trafficking into the state, a lot of gun trafficking out. And so we have to be focused on not just the ways that people are choosing to end their life, but the reasons behind that. And models that sometimes Montpelier can't come up with, but they can fund and they can support and they can give nonprofits and local community agencies the flexibility to really think holistically about how you bring elders and at-risk teens together, or how you create models that give people more access to the outdoors and open space. I was visiting Jack Duffy at Valley Vista, he runs one of the largest treatment center in the state, and he said he believes 90% of the women who he works with who are addicted had sexual or domestic violence in their past that caused such trauma that they're having really difficult time recovering. And I saw that every day at Women Helping Battered Women. And those are the kinds of things where we need to give our agencies the flexibility to really help people work through that trauma and any way we can to prevent that trauma.
Thank you.
So I heard the comment about sort of differently. I heard it as, are we going to give people in the state of Vermont sort of different options about the way that they can live in society? And that's one of the reasons that my folks moved to Vermont in 1970. They were down in Fairfield County, Connecticut, and they wanted to come back to the land like so many people of that era did, because they saw in Vermont an alternative way to do things, that it wasn't the rat race that existed everywhere else. And I think we still have that opportunity, but we're facing a lot of difficulties. many Vermonters are challenged with affordable housing even without a pressure on growth, our population growth. And so I think one of the things that we have to do as a state is make sure that we're allowing people to have the alternative opportunities that I think brought so many people into the state in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but also reinforce the infrastructure that's going to allow people to live here. And it's doing things like putting money into affordable housing so that people don't feel the pressure of housing costs. It is doing things like investing in land conservation and opportunities for our agricultural economy to grow. And those are things that have been priorities for me as Speaker of the House over the last 8 years. It's making sure that we have investments in people's drug treatment and things like that so that they can get well if they want to. These are all things that have to be priorities of the state, and I believe are, but we have more progress that we need to make.
Thank you. We'll take a call from our listeners. Hello, you're on CCTV.
Hi, yes. This is Amy, and I'm calling from Burlington. And I just had a question. As a substitute teacher working in the school systems, the safety of our children and families is really important to me. With rising anti-vaccine sentiment, despite the widespread scientific evidence supporting vaccines, I'm wondering how the candidates feel about vaccine requirements for children to attend public schools, and if they could explain their recent votes on a bill that would loosen vaccine requirements and put our children, teachers, and families at more risk.
Shap, you want to start on this one?
I think that the caller is asking about the removal of the philosophical exemption and the discussion around that. And I supported the removal of the philosophical exemption as somebody who believes that the challenges that we face in making decisions at the state level really is about figuring out the right intersection with regard to personal rights versus public health. And given what we had seen in many states around the country, I believe that it was appropriate to strengthen our vaccination requirements. And so I supported that bill. And I believe that it will help us in the long run with regard to public health.
Thank you, Kesha.
Well, and thank you, Amy, for your work as a teacher and for working with our young folks. I absolutely believe in the science of vaccines, like I believe in the science of climate change. It's indisputable that it helps protect our kids and make sure that we have safe schools. And what was difficult about the conversation around vaccines in the legislature was taking away just the philosophical exemption, leaving the religious exemption in place, worrying about families either finding religion or removing their kids from the system altogether. And then they're still going to be in our playgrounds or in our grocery stores and maybe further removed from accessing health care or getting the education that they need. And so I, frankly, worried about that greatly. And when I thought about the families who were coming into the legislature vehemently asking us not to take away this choice, a lot of them had an older child who had had an adverse experience to a vaccine. And so they were worried that their younger child would, and they used the philosophical exemption in that regard. So having greater conversations, greater trust with our medical providers, I believe is the path forward. Personally, I would like to see us remove both the philosophical and religious exemption and work harder to figure out what it is about the medical exemption that's not working for families who really feel like they have a deeply held medical concern about having a child who will have an adverse reaction.
Thank you, David.
Sure. Thank you, Amy, for the call. I appreciate it. And this was a very difficult topic, as I think we all know, because in part, it's a question of the societal benefit of vaccines, which I completely agree from a medical perspective. I don't agree with the thimerosal causes autism or any of those things. I was a chemistry major for a while in college before changing out of it. But science is science, and those vaccines do not cause those problems. On the other hand, I have a really strong value around we each can only control ultimately what happens to ourselves. Whether that's a woman's right to choose and making sure that we protect a woman's right to choose and what a woman wants to do with her body, or in this case, actually children who don't even have the opportunity to choose at that point. And so their parents are making some decisions for them. And I recognize that this is a difficult situation because there are other children who don't choose their genetic situation and may be predisposed through leukemia or other health immune system challenges, that this does put them at risk, or adults who are in chemotherapy and their system is at risk. But we also have to look at how can we make it so that the incentive or the information is out there that is clear so that people do this because it's the right thing to do. And if you actually looked at the statistics, even in Vermont, some of them were very misleading, saying we have this tremendous problem, because actually when you have 13 or 15 prescription or vaccines that you're supposed to get and you didn't get one, you are considered unvaccinated. And so the percentage that were, quote, unvaccinated in creating, quote, herd immunity was actually very much overblown relative to the reality in most areas. And when you look at the whooping cough outbreak that happened and other things, actually it was many people who had already gotten the vaccine who also were getting whooping cough. So I think it's really important that we step back a minute and have more honest discussion about it than black or white, hardcore this side, hardcore that side, and recognize that we all have to work together to try to get our rates up, but also to protect all of our children. And I am going to go on for just a moment, because for me this has a personal story as well, which is that my father was a doctor. When he was practicing medicine, there was a new technology and a new method used, and it saved hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lives. Unfortunately, there were 4 doctors back then and 1 more recently who actually suffered the consequences of that new technology, because it was putting radioactive barium into patients so they could see on the screen while they were operating on them their internal organs. And the doctors didn't know at that time to wear lead vests. And so a great medical advancement that has saved hundreds of thousands of lives also personally cost me my father when I was 13, when he died in 1984. And so sometimes when we're making policy, and I think this is true for all of us, Shap talked about some of the healthcare issues with his spouse going through breast cancer, we make decisions based on both our constituent contacts, through information we learn at the legislature, and through personal experience. And for me, this one had a personal experience side that was very near to me.
Thank you. So we'll take another call. And by the way, the number is 802-862-3966. If anyone else wants to call in, we have a caller right now. Welcome to CCTV.
Cool. Hello.
Hi, welcome to CCTV. Hi. Do you have a question for the candidates?
I do. So ages 1 to 3 are the formative years for kids. And I'm wondering how the candidates think Vermont can support kids and families and prepare them for a strong future.
So let's start with Kesha this time.
Great, and I appreciate the call, having been a Head Start advocate and knowing how much that infusion of investment and resources in our most vulnerable kids, those living in poverty, knowing what difference that has made. I think there's no 2 ways around Vermont having to prioritize access to early childhood education for our young people, affordable childcare for parents, and putting more resources into how we provide that for all Vermonters. We took 1 step with universal pre-kindergarten and ensuring that all our districts have access to 10 hours a week of pre-K. It's certainly not enough. For most moms, or dads, whoever's dropping the kids off, that's, getting them to daycare, turning around, and coming right back. And so we have to ensure that we have full childcare available to all Vermonters. We have to make that investment. But you look at something we did recently with raising the quality of access to childcare, with ensuring that providers have a certain level of education and quality indicators for their childcare facility. And what we should be doing is asking them every day, how can we help you meet those standards? Right now, there's a lot of providers who say, of course we want to do better, but how are we going to pay for these classes or these requirements when the subsidy is so low for what we receive from low-income families? So raising that subsidy, but also think about creative ways perhaps to forgive the debt of early childhood educators who are going back to school to meet our requirements and to be better childcare providers. There are a lot of creative things that we can do to help ensure we have quality access to childcare and that it's affordable for all Vermonters.
Great, thank you. David, do you want to go next?
Well, sure. I think one policy that we also need to look forward to and work towards passing is paid family leave, so that actually someone can be home in these early formative months or even possibly years. But also raising the minimum wage. And we need to progressively change that and raise it up to about $15 an hour within the next handful of years. And as a small business owner who does pay down near the minimum wage and sometimes the minimum wage itself, I can tell you it's going to be really hard for my business, but it's also the right policy. And if we do it in a logical, progressive, stepped way, then all of the small businesses that will be paying more to their workers will also be selling more of their product to Vermonters and be able to have the income to do it. And as Vermonters start getting paid better, either someone can afford to stay home some more, because ultimately we both need more child care centers and child care opportunities, but also afford people the opportunity to sometimes be home with their own children, because we've gone to this method where everybody's got to work just to pay their bills. And so we need to sort of tackle this from all directions, both increasing child care subsidies, but also we did increase the standards for many of these small child care centers, and that's actually really hard on many of them to meet those standards, and some are closing. And I think sometimes there is both good intentions from government plans and policies, but sometimes also some overreach that ultimately squishes out some of those opportunities. And so I think we need to revisit those a little bit and make sure we either afford more opportunities and help by the state to help these small child care providers to meet those standards, or we need to make it sure that they can still exist, because we're not going to have more opportunities for kids and families by closing more centers because they can't meet all the standards. So there's a delicate balance there, but we certainly need to focus on it.
Thank you. Shap?
So an organization called Let's Grow Kids has been doing a lot of advocacy on this particular issue around making sure that kids have affordable access to early childhood education. They pushed for, and we passed into law, a blue ribbon commission that is going to come back with reports this fall. And I, as Lieutenant Governor, will be leading the charge to make sure that those recommendations are implemented. Why? Well, because it's good for our kids, and it's really good for our employers and families as well. You know, one of the challenges that a lot of employers are having is finding employees, and one of the reasons that they're having a hard time finding employees is because the people who might be employed by them can't afford childcare or can't get their kids into good childcare. A good friend of mine who just had a baby, who teaches in a public school, can afford childcare, can't find access to it, still on the wait list, even though the baby was just born. So we have the need to expand it. We need to make it more affordable. I will push, as Lieutenant Governor, bring people together to move forward with the recommendations that come from that Blue Ribbon Commission on affordable childcare.
Thank you. We're going to take another call. Hello, you're on CCTV. Do you have a question for the candidates?
Yeah, hi. My question is for David Zuckerman. I want to know whether he accepts corporate contributions.
I do not. I have not. I think I'm the only candidate running who has not accepted any corporate contributions, both in this election and in any of the 10 other times that I've run for office. To me, we need to work towards getting corporate contributions out of the system. In the Senate, we actually voted for and passed an amendment to remove corporate donations into campaigns. Unfortunately, the next day, many of my Senate colleagues reversed their decision, both Republicans and some Democrats, to allow for those corporate donations. And ultimately, to me, that's part of the reflection of sort of the establishment political world versus those of us that are trying to represent those that are everyday citizens that don't have the ability to consolidate larger sums of money through our businesses or through sort of corporate PACs. And so, no, I do not take any corporate contributions. Thank you.
How about you, Kesha? Did you?
Well, so I think Dave once said to me, sometimes at the end of the day, all we have is our vote. And in 2014, when we had legislation on the table, S82, that would vastly increase the amount of corporate and wealthy individual contributions that could be made to PACs, to parties, and to individual candidates, I was the only person at this table to vote no, and to keep those limits lower. And so now we're in the system that we're in. I don't think of my contributions as transactional. I take the money that's available in the system that I need to win and to get my message across to Vermonters. And I know the folks who contribute to me, whether they're small business owners or families, don't expect anything in return but for me to keep speaking my mind and standing up for what I believe in and what a lot of Vermonters want to see.
So your answer is a yes, you do take corporate contributions, right?
I have several contributions from small businesses, and they're businesses that have grown right here in Vermont, and I'm proud of that.
Thank you. Shap?
Yes, I have taken corporate contributions, and I actually think the issue of corporate contributions, while a legitimate one, actually shields a bigger challenge, because whether you're taking money from corporations or wealthy individuals, you're still taking money from organizations or people. And the problem isn't where the money is coming from. The problem is the fact that there's the need for so much money in our political system. Frankly, I would prefer to have a publicly financed system. I did appreciate the fact that David challenged the ruling around the publicly financed system to see whether we could pull it back so that you could be involved in the public finance system even earlier than it was originally suggested. And I think it makes sense for us to go back and take a look at our laws around the publicly financing of campaigns. I would venture a guess that all three of the people at this table find the idea of raising money for the political campaigns one of the most difficult and unenjoyable parts of campaigning.
If I could follow up a little bit, because there was a
If you
charge
keep
made.
it to 1 minute.
Sure. Well, the discussion was about voting for the bill that passed, and ultimately the reason I voted for that bill was because I also went to the Government Operations Committee and said, in order for public financing to even be a viable option for anybody, we need to increase those numbers for the governor and lieutenant governor's race, which ultimately I wasn't able to use, nor was anybody else, or nobody else chose to. But I asked them to double those numbers, and they did. And part of working with other folks is when you ask for something to be in a bill, especially something as significant as that, which makes public financing a viable option for people in the future, yes, I did vote for that bill. I'll also state clearly that of all the candidates here, the average donation I've received is significantly lower than either of my opponents. Partly that's because I've had more donations, and I've also had fewer large $4,000 donations, which I believe both of my opponents got those donations from the major developer of the downtown mall. I don't know which one he's hoping wins. Maybe he's hedging his bets, but people with a lot of money can afford to do that, and other people put what few dollars they have behind the candidate they really want to see win.
Thank you, David. So one last question, and then we'll have final remarks. This one's about marijuana legislation. And many people expected Vermont to legalize marijuana in 2016, but it turned out to be more contentious and complicated. Do you expect legalization to come back in the legislature in 2017? And if so, what's your position? And we'll start with Shap.
Yeah. I think actually people had not done their homework if they expected it to pass in 2016. I spoke with the governor and with the advocates in the fall of 2015 and told them that based on the discussions that I'd had with people within the House, and this was at a time and throughout when I was supporting the legislation, that I did not believe that there was the support. Why was that? Well, one, I think people were concerned about the implementation of a bill like that with a crossover of administrations. The second issue, I think, is that people were not convinced about whether the corporate model or allowing homegrown was the right way to go. And then there were a lot of people who were philosophically opposed. I support legalization of marijuana. I do believe that we have to make sure that we have highway safety right, and I believe that we've got to figure out prevention and making sure that we're keeping marijuana out of the hands of kids. What I will say is that our current policy is not working in that regard. The final thing I'll say is this. If it's about generating revenue for the state of Vermont, that's the wrong reason to move forward with the legalization of marijuana. We should be doing it to make sure that we don't actually have a black market anymore, and we should do it so that we can create more prevention programs and make sure that kids are not interacting with black market dealers. It shouldn't be about profit.
Thank you. David?
Well, for 20 years, I've been an advocate for reforming our cannabis laws. I introduced our medical laws, which I think many Vermonters have benefited from, with the opportunities to alleviate pain or to alleviate hunger issues or queasiness from chemotherapy, to help folks with HIV. And I think that's been a very beneficial law for thousands of Vermonters, and I'm very proud to have worked to pass that. Now, with respect to full-on cannabis reform, bringing this underground market above board, I agree. Shap and I talked a lot about this legislation back in 2015, as well as going into this year in the legislature. And what we did in the Senate, and Jeanette White deserves a lot of credit, is hold hearings based on the Rand report that the House and Senate commissioned to look at all the myths and all the fears that people promulgate left and right around cannabis, and actually worked to debunk those myths. And I encouraged Shap in the fall to say, bring that report to your health committee and your education committee and your transportation committee and your judiciary committee, and have them just take a couple days time to look at the report, to really look at the facts behind what's happening, so that those folks who are concerned and were concerned would start to see that the myths versus the reality were not the same. And if we look at Colorado now, actually teen use across the board of different drugs is slightly down. Now, I'm not saying that's because cannabis passed, but clearly it didn't go way up because cannabis passed. And I agree with Shap that the main reason to do it first and foremost is to actually have it not be a drug dealer who doesn't check your ID, ready to sell you tainted cannabis, whether it's herbicides, pesticides, or other drugs, or if they're out of cannabis, offering a child or a young person some other drug. Let's regulate it like beer. You can brew your own beer. You should be able to grow a couple plants. But if you're not going to do that, there should be a commercial system that's regulated, safe, and actually does generate the revenue to treat these drugs as a health issue with prevention, treatment, education, and law enforcement. And then, if there's extra revenue, which in Colorado there is, use it for economic development and higher education, because ultimately that's what's going to reduce our drug use.
Thank you. Kesha?
So I was one of the legislators working to commission the RAND study. And what we got back was a lot of useful information. I think one of the most important things we heard was, bear in mind, you're a tiny state with a huge population around you, millions of people around you, without the same public safety infrastructure that a large Western state has. And I take that very seriously as somebody who's been a preschool teacher and a social worker and is thinking a lot about our schools and our communities being on the front lines. And I think there were a number of questions that we didn't answer in the Senate bill. And at the same time, we were also having a conversation about most Vermonters really supporting our decriminalization efforts. And, I voted to decriminalization small amounts of homegrown marijuana. But there are three things that I was concerned about with the Senate bill that I would like to see addressed in the future. And I imagine this issue will be taken up again. We just saw a VPR poll that said voters actually want to decide on it themselves and cut the legislature out. But I think there's three important considerations we need to discuss, lessons learned from Washington and Colorado. Number one is, what does it look like to have a patchwork of law enforcement regulations around your state? If we allow some communities to remove themselves from creating access to marijuana and having it be legal in their community, like Colorado did, are we setting ourselves up for a mixed message and inability for law enforcement in one community next to another? And we have small village centers, really close together in Vermont. Do we inhibit our ability to work on that and ensure our law enforcement has the tools they need? Two, we didn't really have a conversation about marijuana tourism. We talked a lot about the revenue it would bring in, but what about the social costs and the cost to having people not who are at home smoking a joint, like we know there are many otherwise law-abiding Vermonters do, but what about people who come to your community and want to get extremely high, and they've seen a lot of issues in Colorado with, people who are both drunk and high on ski lifts, et cetera. What does that look like in terms of costs as well for our communities? And finally, we have not addressed the institutional classism and racism that comes along with the drug trade. And I was looking forward to doing that with this bill. And the bill that came over from the Senate still said that if you've had a criminal conviction, you can't participate in the industry. So who does that mean will be making money in this industry? It's people who have never had a criminal conviction, have never gotten in trouble with the law. They can make money hand over fist. But we know even even in Vermont, black men make up 1% of the state population and 14% of who's in prison. And when you look at statistics in Colorado, they still have not dealt with the divide in terms of who's still getting arrested and who's making money off the legalization of marijuana. And that's something we need to take a hard look at before we legalize.
Thank you very much. So, closing statements, and this time we'll start with Kesha, and then David, and then Shap.
Wonderful. I grew up in my Indian immigrant father and Jewish American mother's Irish pub, sweeping peanut shells off the floor, bussing tables, putting in a hard day's work, and I have given that same work ethic to every single thing I've been involved in, whether it's teaching our kids in preschool, being a social worker for victims of domestic violence, working in local government, or serving 8 years in the legislature, building consensus with conviction, and working hard on legislation that's passed unanimously in the House, like renewable energy siting, or working hard on things like tribal recognition when nobody else would in the state. And that's the kind of ethic that I would bring to being Vermont's next lieutenant governor. Hard work, not worrying about who gets the credit, and elevating the conversation so that we can create long-term vision and long-term solutions to solve some of our most intractable issues that make it unaffordable for families to be here. You know, in fact, most Vermonters are being asked to take a Vermont discount on their wages while they're paying a Vermont premium on their cost of living. It's unsustainable, and we have to worry about supporting the next generation and ensuring they have the brightest future possible. Join me in I would love to be your next lieutenant governor to help build that bright future for Vermont. Thank you.
David?
Thank you, Anne, for the hosting, or dual hosting today. I would certainly appreciate folks' support in the August 9th primary for lieutenant governor. And I just want to say I started volunteering for Bernie in 1992 when I saw someone who wore their politics right on their sleeve, went out there and fought for the issues, and has continued to do that all the way through till just at this convention. And I grew up with a poster on the wall saying, "Behold the turtle who only makes progress when it sticks its neck out." And I've been doing that on a range of issues, from marriage equality to cannabis reform, GMO labeling, raising the minimum wage, affordable housing, and working with people throughout the state to bring them into the process. And that's really what Bernie's been talking about. And clearly in this election, I am the anti-establishment candidate, the one who's willing to just fight for issues regardless of what the corporate or political establishment wants. And if you're ready to see that continue moving forward, I hope you'll support me. I'm someone who has started a business. I'd be the first farmer elected in over 50 years to be elected either governor or lieutenant governor. As a farmer, I look for efficiencies every day. I'd like to see us look for those efficiencies in state government and save ourselves money so we can invest in universal health care, expanding affordable child care, investing in our rural broadband infrastructure. There are some real opportunities out there as we go to tackle some of the challenges people are really facing today. And for me, if I can have that opportunity to bring more people into the process, more ideas into the process, then I think we're going to have a brighter future in Vermont. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Shap.
Marriage equality, aid in dying, increasing the amount of renewable energy, making sure that we kept our commitment to things like putting investments in our working lands and making sure that we conserve land throughout the state. All of those things have been a hallmark of my last 8 years as Speaker. I've brought people together to get issues across the line, to make sure that all Vermonters could love whoever they wanted at a time when we were moving back on that issue. We overrode a veto of Governor Douglas, 100 votes, at a time where California had just recently moved back by passing a referendum that banned marriage equality. We have pushed forward on all of these issues, and I've led by making sure that other people get credit for the issues. That's the kind of person that I'll be as your next lieutenant governor. And I believe that I bring something different than the other two candidates. As somebody who has lived in both Chittenden County and who grew up and returned to Lamoille County, I understand that Vermont is a number of different worlds. And I want to bring those experiences with me and represent all Vermonters as your next lieutenant governor. I ask for your vote on August 9th. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all. This has been a good evening. It's been great to hear from you, and hope you enjoyed this. CCTV listeners, thank you.
Great.